Ready to get started. Good morning. Welcome to day 3 of House of Paint's annual knowledge conference. This is our second year doing it virtually, and we greatly appreciate you joining us here on the internet on what is a beautiful day here where I'm broadcasting from. I'm coming to you from what we call Ottawa, so our House of Paint is located. We do wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. My colleague Zoe is going to put some resources in the chat so that you can learn a little bit more about the claim to this land by its First Peoples. There's a wonderful blog by Dr. Lynn Gell that really goes over the claim to the land, the traditional peoples, and what reconciliation could possibly look like. I do encourage you to learn about the land that you occupy. In case you're tuning in from elsewhere, we've also included the link to native-land.ca, where you can learn more about the different tribes and languages that are traditional to whatever land you currently occupy. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce our guests today. We have Andi Vicente and Sinda Graziz. They're both community organizers, and they are here to talk about documenting the undocumented. I will invite them to introduce themselves. Andi, Sinda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. I can start. Hi, everyone. My name is Andi. I am the daughter of undocumented parents from the Philippines that have been without papers and status for more than 30 years. And my original educational background was in cultural resource management and film ethnography that was like interrupted for the reason of having to support my mother navigate particular systems around being undocumented. And as a result, I ended up finding myself in wanting to do more support work for folks who are in similar situations as my parents. So I did some settlement and integration services for a while, and more recently worked with LGBTQ newcomers and refugees. Um, Before I hand it out to Cinda, I just wanted to recognize that both Cinda and I do community organizing work, because it's important, and we do consider ourselves and having a better understanding of the colonial route that got us here leads us to also prioritize building solidarity with Indigenous peoples here and everywhere.
Thank you, Andi. Hello, everybody. My name is Sinda Graziz, and I am an immigrant in this country, originally from Tunisia, and have been residing on the unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory of the Anishinaabe people here on Turtle Island. I moved to Turtle Island right after the Tunisian Revolution in 2000, that happened 2011, and to seek economic stability and better opportunities. My family is still residing back home, and I have a sister, my sibling, who is residing in Austria, also left after the revolution. I'm also an Amazigh, African, and Arab queer person of color. I'm currently a student pursuing a master's degree at the University of St. Paul, Social Innovation, studying irregular migration and migrant justice movement in the Mediterranean region. I'm also a community worker and coordinator of the LGBTQIA+ newcomer program at Centertown Community Health Center, which previously was led by Andi Vicente. I have been involved in migrant justice organizing since 2011. I did this work in Tunisia, in my country. I did some of this work in Germany, South Africa, and here in Canada. I'm currently doing this work on the Algonquin territory and have been doing it since I moved here, and in a city known under its colonial name, Ottawa. I have been involved with groups such as No One is Illegal, Refugee Welcome, Ottawa, and Immigration Detention Network, Justice for DPAN, and Ottawa Sanctuary City Network. And I will leave it at this. Start sharing. All right. So we already presented ourselves, and we talked a little bit of where we do this work. So maybe we can share a little bit why we do this work. Do you want to start, Andi?
Yeah, for sure. I do this work because it directly impacts my family and impacts the community that my family is from. So a lot of Filipinos um, sort of have that experience of living precariously. And at the moment, I am involved in art making and art making that speaks to the impacts that living precariously has on different peoples. And then also, I'm interested in our relationship to the land and what that means to migrants, what that means to Indigenous peoples. Um, what it means to folks who have like hyphenated identities, who sort of claim homeness in like different ways. And I, yeah, I was telling a friend last night actually in the car that, like I do this work because, I just want my mom and like other people like my mom to be in a better place with their lives. And more than anything else, to have agency in their lives, which is something that immigration systems and border imperialism sort of take away from migrants, most especially. And how that narrative is not just like this narrative of like hardship and struggle, that those narratives can like be reimagined by the right kind of community support. Yeah.
Well, similarly to Andi, I do this work for many reasons that they already mentioned. And I will add that I also do this work to seek reparation for the harm colonial empires had inflicted on our communities in the South. And I do this work because we should be able to live in dignity wherever we decide to live in, and not to be treated as second-class citizens, to not be questioned in our truth and humiliated to prove that we are worthy of being in this country, to not be criminalized for being immigrants, to not be detained and deported, and to not be exploited for our labor. So for all these reasons, I think there is room for me to do a lot of work, and for many like us to do a lot of work, and we still need to do more. And we'll tell you a little more. So who else does this work in our communities across, whether it's across, well, we will focus a lot on Ottawa and Canada in this context. Migrant justice movement is very diverse, and it expands all the time to include academics. A lot of academics are doing this work in academia, community organizations. I will name a few, and we can always share their links later on. We have organization in Ottawa like OCISO, the Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organization. We have organization like CCI, which is Catholic Center for Immigrant Women Services Organization. These are settlement agency that works in Ottawa supporting immigrants and people with different status, including precarious status. Community Health and Resource Center in Ottawa, they do a lot of this work too. And Andi and I have this experience of working in both sectors, in settlement agency and in the community centers. And the few centers I can think of are the Vanier Community Center that has a fairly large newcomer program. Somerset West Community Center, the Centertown Community Center where I work, Southeast Ottawa Community Center. All these centers are serving immigrants and people with precarious status. We also can name grassroots organizations and groups such as Migrant Ottawa, Ottawa Sanctuary City, No One is Illegal. Maybe I'll let Andi add a few in here.
Yeah, yeah, there's there's so many people that do this work that we are, thankful for, and that also, yeah, like, I mean, Cinda named quite a few, but like to recognize that, it's like the union organizers that also help in ensuring, like better livelihoods for folks who are undocumented. Um, and people with lived experiences themselves that do a lot of that advocacy work that really articulate their own narratives in a way that helps folks who are in particular positions of power to articulate, to like change either certain policies um, or at least highlight the realities of how undocumented and precarious folks sort of navigate different systems. Um, and with that, they lead that with, with care in mind and inclusivity and compassion. And other examples of folks that we work with are like a lot of youth organizations as well, notably like Undocumented Canada, the Palestinian Youth Movement, as well as folks who work with specific newcomers in mind. So, for example, Capital Rainbow Refuge, who works specifically with LGBTQ newcomers and refugees. We have like examples of that in like the other slides. But yeah, more than anything, I think coupled with the mobilization of providing the voice of like unacceptability around the imposing and colonial harmful impacts of borders, with like even like church communities that have like folks with like the resources and the time to assist during like crisis situations is really important. So yeah, just overall just recognizing that this work is done not with like a specific kind of activist or a specific kind of person, that we all like have a role in contributing in ensuring that folks don't get left behind. We can probably go through the slides to kind of illustrate some more of that. But for folks who are kind of like entering this work, where it's like the first time that they're hearing about the existence of undocumented folks in North America, like one of the first readings that I was given was by Harsha Walia. And I feel that through her radical writings, I've been able to learn about terms like border imperialism and colonialism and how it's kind of been perpetuated like within the immigration system and how it upholds particular things. And yeah, I encourage folks to read like her newer book, Border and Rule, but also her older work, which is Border Imperialism. And then the other resource that I think would be really interesting for folks to kind of read about and to know about, next slide, Sinda, is so the Capital Rainbow Refugee Program has something called the Queer Refugee Hearings Program Toolkit, which is an amazing guide for refugee claimants, based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, to kind of understand like, the right kinds of help to get when navigating submitting like a refugee claim, and like what supports are available, and understanding how to write like a basis of claim properly and what to include. And I wouldn't like, we're Cinda and I are going through like multiple different immigration pathways like really quickly, so we don't have all the time in the world to explain thoroughly what that means. But just generally in terms of like the refugee claim process, I through my experience in supporting folks and attending hearings, it's particularly detrimental in that folks are required to come up with evidence that, like sort of solidifies their claim of, their persecution or their own personal experiences, whether they're like very traumatic or maybe even like unexplored yet to like complete strangers that decide their claim. Um, and yeah, I mean, I can speak a lot to that, but I encourage folks to um, sort of read up on the refugee claim hearing process, and know that there are ways of like supporting folks through that, those particular kinds of processes. Anyways, I'll continue
I
more.
I
Yeah.
can actually add a little bit about, because today we're talking about status and precariousness of status and documentation. I also want to add, we talked about Harsha Walia being a pillar in this work, and we in our, or at least shaping our understanding of what the different hardship that people go through when they immigrate, and different status and systems of the immigration system, specifically in Canada. Um, and one other thing I wanted to add is around when we work with, I want to highlight that a lot of people who are facing precariousness right now, who are undocumented, who are stateless in our city, are also the one who are leading these movements, are the one who are leading different campaigns to end statelessness, different campaign to end undocumentation, usually through their personal experience and personal story. And we're oftentimes invited to be in these spaces to support the work that is led and being done by the person themselves, and which is important because it's important for us as organizer to respect that and let them take the lead, and we follow their pace. And also it's an exciting thing for an organizer, at least for myself, and I'm sure for Andi as well, when we work with people to support them in their campaign, and that it's a campaign that becomes more in the media, more national, or like we hear about it across the country. The benefit of that usually comes with, like, we're not just fighting for this one person, we're fighting for many others like this person to change the law. So if we do win to stop the deportation of one person, to restore status to one person, that means we're opening the room and hope basically to everybody who is in that situation to get there. And so we're those are really exciting campaigns, and those that exist, and I can name a few in Ottawa currently. We know of a few, like we'll talk a little bit more in depth about Deepan Budlekoti, which was in a campaign that has been around for quite some times and went through different phases of it, but I will definitely encourage you to read more about, and we can definitely share more information around it by email. There is also a campaign around, currently a campaign for Muhammad Harakat. Muhammad Harakat is a resident of Ottawa and is currently potentially facing deportation to Algeria, his country of origin, after years of incarceration and battling a very unlawful system of immigration, or a law in Canada, which is a secret certificate. I won't go in depth in it, but it is an unconstitutional law that we still have. Then we're also having a hard time repelling, even though it is unconstitutional. I will definitely invite you to read more about the secret certificate in Canada. But currently, as we speak, people are fighting for Muhammad Harakat to stay in this country, and he have been fighting for the last pretty much 30 years of his life. Then for maybe I'll give it to you to talk a little bit about other initiatives like Agir.
Yeah. So I'm based in Jojaga, in Montreal, and so at the moment, so there's quite a few similar organizations and collectives that support folks with precarious immigration status. And one of the organizations that I'm on the board of is Agir, which is an organization that supports specifically LGBTQ newcomers and refugees. And recently they came up with um, an ID for LGBTQ folks, immigrants and refugees, to share as like proof of residency and identity. One thing that we like constantly take for granted is like how much identity and the proof of identity is policed, and how much of it is just a tool of gatekeeping survival, really. And the city of Montreal has two different sort of resident cards that kind of have access to public services. And this one is specifically for LGBTQ immigrants and refugees. And I think it's an identity piece that is very helpful for folks who identify as trans as well, which is a whole other experience as a newcomer and refugee. But just to kind of highlight that there's different examples of how folks either as social workers or in academia or in community organizing who assist folks in navigating different systems. And just in Ottawa specifically, a few years ago, a group of folks were trying to get Ottawa to be a sanctuary city, which means and similar in these like identity cards for folks to have access to municipal services. And like I think folks are still working on that, but I mean it's a strong argument in that these folks are like residents here. They live in our cities. They contribute to the economy, and a lot of the time they don't see the benefits. Like folks don't have access to certain things, even though potentially they're paying through it with their taxes. Sin and I were discussing the other day about like probably the like thousands of dollars that folks with precarious immigration status contribute monetarily to different systems, either through their like indentured labor or through paying taxes that they don't benefit from at all, and that they have to rely on community members to have support, like initiatives like mutual aid programs, where the communities, especially I've seen in like the pandemic, just a lot of really great initiatives done by like anybody just being like, hey, like my neighbor needs like a couple of $1,000s to like cover these expenses. And as much as those things are like very important to have, there's also the need to kind of push us to like, so why don't they have access to this? So why are folks like living so precariously to the point where they're dependent on other folks like strangers for their survival, when really all of us should have access to the bare minimum.
Maybe I can add one last thing in this context about Deepan Butlakoti. As you see here, there is the OCDC on trial, which is the story of Deepan. Currently, it's happening as we speak, and there is opportunity if you want to take action. We will be sharing more resources by email if you registered, or we can also share later on when we at the end of this presentation in the chat more links to check out. But there is a trial happening on November 8th and 9th, which is next week, from 9:30 to 5 p.m. You can go to the court if you are based in Ottawa, or you can be on Zoom. We can share with you the link. But a big call to action we're making right now is people to watch. So we want to make sure that, and Deepan is representing himself against the OCDC. So we want to make sure that Deepan knows that the community is here, that we will show up either if we can to the court or to the link on Zoom. You can also show up and watch the trial, and you will have a better idea of what statelessness look like, and what does it mean to be stateless and dealing with a state that is oppressing you, and making sure that you will never get status again. And that's the reality of Deepan since I met them, which was about 8 years ago when I joined their support committee.
Just want to thank Zoe for giving out all that information in the chat. And that will, for folks who've registered for this, or for folks who want to reach out, more than happy to share all this information of all the amazing work that's being done in the community at the moment.
We'll talk a little bit about status for all. What does that mean for us and as organizers, but also what does it mean in the perception of the public? How do we frame it, and the power of framing these issues? So I'll start with this. So I want to start by saying the activist movement here in Canada, and specifically in North America in general, have been fighting primarily to support easier path for citizenship and permanent residency, and to increase our numbers of refugees and immigrants we accept on an annual basis here in Canada, for example, and the US as well. One of the things that this is important work we do, and we need to continue doing it, considering the knowledge we have around the system and how it works and how we can make it here as immigrants. However, I want to also talk a little bit that as organizers, we also need to remain critical of these paths and these ways of how we are framing our movement and our demands when we are demanding easier path for citizenship, or we're demanding more, like we saw during the pandemic, how the Liberal Party had said, oh, all the immigrants who've been working on frontline and didn't have access yet to more stable documents, they now have the pathway to PR or permanent residency a little easier. These are great gains and important gains. But also, as we see more conservative and more liberal rallying politically for these issues, at the same time, we're seeing them supporting and enforcing borders. And that's where the trick is. Increasing border enforcement impact immigrants as they get more scrutinized. The criteria to access this country become way higher. It costs more money. And the country basically become more selective with who get to access Canada or the United States. And that means we talk usually as organizers about who is a desirable immigrant or desirable citizen versus who is not. And there is this dichotomy that is created in Canada when we talk about immigrants. Usually you see it as like immigrants are hard worker, they deserve status, or because we are hard worker, we deserve to be able to stay in this country and we're contributing. The reality is everybody deserves status, whether you're a hard worker or not. The reality is that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and have their rights respected, whether you are a hard worker or not. The fact you are a hard worker should not be the reason why you should access status. And I'm going to give two examples that are really good example that shows how, as advocate, we really need to be critical about borders. And Harsha does it well in both her books, explaining how border imperialism really is our nemesis, basically, as organizers. Like, we really need to pay attention to that too. I'm going to give the example, for example, in the US, we have you probably heard of the DACA program, or the DREAM Act, and which allows a lot of immigrants to come to the US, study if they are enrolled in college and they're going to come to study, or if they join the military. And so two reasons to come to this country and be able to benefit from the freedom or the rights that this country offers, or seek asylum in a way in that country. And in the sense, like a lot of the organizers who organized for the DACA program to remain intact, especially under Trump, they were also organizing to support imperial wars abroad. This program, and that's where we need to be critical as organizers. We want more people to get DACA, obviously, and stay in the country, but we want to make sure that we remain critical of what's the role the US plays in the war abroad and in our communities in the South, for example. A good example in Canada I can give is the Bill C-24, which is a citizenship bill when that was introduced under Harper and is still remain in effect today, even though the Liberal had promised to repeal it, and it went to the Supreme Court, I think, more than once, and we're still waiting for an answer. But basically, when we fought very hard as organizers to make Canadian citizenship easier to get, the pathway easier, cheaper, and quicker. That being said, when we were fighting for that, the government said, yeah, sure, we can give you an easier path. But at the same time, we're going to add a clause in your citizenship that says, if you are dual citizen, let's say for me, I'm actually applying currently for my citizenship here, but I am Tunisian national, and I will remain Tunisian national. So when I receive my Canadian citizenship, it's going to be my second citizenship, which make me automatically seen as a second-class citizen here in Canada, which means I may have the rights of the citizenship and be treated the same as, well, not completely the same as a Canadian, but the government still have the right to revoke my citizenship if I make a mistake that they deem, even if I paid for my mistake. Let's say I made a mistake, a criminal act, I go to jail, I pay for it, they have the right to revoke my citizenship as a double punishment. So I get punished the first time to go to jail, and the second time by revoking this citizenship I have gained. So that is an important bill to fight, because that means just automatically, if you're a dual citizen, your citizenship, your Canadian citizenship can be revoked at any time if you committed a crime.
And that includes, sorry, Sinda, that includes if you are born here as well. And I mean, people forget that, like, people have this narrative of what Canada and the immigration system is like here, and kind of divide. There's like the stigma that we're different, we're not as bad as the US, for example, in their immigration policies, but we have stuff like indefinite immigration detention here. We deport folks on like very minor mistakes, and really uproot people's lives on the basis of folks just trying to get by and maybe not updating their address, or maybe not renewing something on time, and it happens, like those things happen, but serious consequences to those mistakes can happen to them as well. And for folks who do have like particular kinds of status, like Sinda had mentioned, there's where none of us have like a true sort of like what do you call it, just like immunity to like things that can happen to like uproot our lives. Like there is like a particular stronghold that immigration policies have in order to have like a particular kind of citizen, to have a particular kind of citizen that doesn't challenge current policies that are harmful.
Maybe we can continue a conversation talking a little bit about some odd policies that we see in our system that have been introduced since the 1800s in Canada to discriminate against immigrants, basically, and particularly immigrants from the South or immigrants who are not European, from European descent and white. And today, how these policies that were introduced way long time ago, they still remain, like the remain of this policy, we see them in the newer policies in our immigration system, and they were actually just like an evolution and just on different names, but fairly similar. I'm going to give a very quick example of the head tax that was introduced in Canada in 1885, which targeted Chinese immigrants who actually came as workers to Canada to build the railroad, especially in the west side of the country, so in British Columbia. And there was a big backlash against the waves of Chinese who came to work for Canada, to work and build the railroad for Canada, because people didn't like that, Canadian from European descent at that time living in those areas and those lands didn't like Chinese people. They found their custom very strange, and they deemed them not being able to assimilate quickly to the dominant white society in Canada, and therefore they started protesting in British Columbia, which protesting against the waves of Chinese people coming to work in the country. And the government, to appease the protesters, introduced what we call the head tax, which initially was $50 at that time, which was a lot of money for that time, and it got increased up to $500 at some point. Before, we no longer call it the head tax because we had to, evolve from that. But today we talk about something called the right of lending fee, the ROLF, which kind of morphed from the head tax policy that was introduced in 1995. And it's a fee that immigrants and refugees have to pay as part of their application to come to Canada, and it's included in their application. And that particular fee can go up to $600, and I think it increases with the time. It increases.
Every week almost.
Yeah, and it's a fee that, for us, the way we see it and be critical of it, this is a fee that help Canada select who get to access Canada. So we want wealthier immigrants. We want immigrants who basically can pay and from a specific socioeconomic class. Those are the desirable immigrant that Canada, this is the message that Canada is kind of sending to all of us by these policies. Do you want to? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a couple of other ones that I wanted to mention was, so like in 1952, there was a new Immigration Act that was passed that gave the Minister of Immigration the official powers of selection, admission, and deportation, which I think Sinda had like touched on a little bit. And when you sort of like fast track to like 2004, when the Safe Third Country Act was implemented, and where it was kind of like this effect that both the US and Canada sort of teamed up, I guess, where asylum seekers who land in the US, for example, which is a common sort of like transit point for folks trying to get to Canada, are no longer allowed to make their way to Canada to claim refugee status. And even during the times of like Trump, for example, when folks were literally trying to claim refugee asylum from like Trump's horrible immigration sort of policies that actually have been dating back for like some time, not specifically through to the Trump administration, they couldn't do that. Like they had to find other pathways to claim refugee status. And then just to touch a little bit about just like migrant labor and how Filipinos historically have been contributing their labor in this country, just either through domestic work or otherwise. Like even the live-in caregiver program itself has like horrible racist sort of policies that have made it so that literally in the beginning, the domestic worker program was predominantly like folks from the Caribbean coming in and working for Canadian employers. And I forgot which particular paper that I had read where they were there was like an outcry of employers where they were like, oh, these Caribbean domestic workers are too like outspoken, and they talk back to us, and we need a particular kind of race of migrants to be subservient to us. And so began like the shift to like Filipino migrant workers, and like that kind of narrative of like the hardworking like immigrant that like puts their head down and doesn't say anything. Um, and how like to this day, like we there was like a time period where the pathway to having residency and citizenship was like a little bit clearer, but now we've reverted back to having a stream where you're only temporary here, you're only working and existing temporary here for our benefit exclusively. We don't care about what's happening back home and like your own livelihood. um, and the just the dehumanization of obviously like all the streams, but the dehumanization of migrant laborers in like particular is appalling and unacceptable. And yet, it's interesting to me because they were like, oh yeah, like Filipinos are like particularly subservient and they bow their head down. When I know so many Filipinos who do migrant organizing work that are not those things at all, that have like community members that have contributed in overthrowing particular policies, like even in Quebec, um, to ensure that there are pathways for them to be here, to exist, to like build families and communities here. And so, yes, shout out to all those community organizers who continue to do that work and to pass that work to like youth movements and stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Andi. So maybe after, we gave you a snapshot of some of the most, what we think in our organizing experience, these are, absurd policies. And as we learn more about how our immigration system is broken, basically, and needs some work, we also today, we know our audience, we and Andi is here as an artist as well, and we have been trying to use art to talk about and documentation, to talk about migrant justice. And today I want to present to you a little project that I had the opportunity to brainstorm it with Andi, and we want to present it to you as a call out for action, but a call out for artists to join us in this project. So we would like to put together 4 different street art exhibits. One is a photography exhibit, one is a graffiti mural, one is live performance, and one is an art installation. This project will use art to raise awareness, solidify partnership, and build community ties between the art scene and the activist scene to counter barriers experienced by individuals with precarious status, immigration status in Ottawa. And using innovative way, in this context, we want to use art to start the conversation and engage the community in Ottawa. We want to collaborate with local artists that will help us highlight and challenge the vulnerabilities that result in fear to access city services. These art exhibits will take place in public spaces, the way we envision them, such as parks, grocery stores, city hall, or a city wall, to make the realities of precarious immigration and precarious immigration status and undocumented migrant more visible. So we want it to be more visible in our day-to-day life, and create a space where we can initiate conversation that lead to advocacy in our community. We want to invite the Ottawa public to come join us in this work, to learn about this work, learn about undocumentation in our city, learn about precarious status in our city, and hopefully take action with us as we continue our advocacy work. This is a call for artists who are interested in working on this topic to contact us and join us in this work. It's also a call for funding opportunities. I have applied for funding through my university and through my program to work on this project last year, and I'm applying this year as well. I'm coming close to perhaps getting the funding I'm requesting. We're still waiting. But I'm also constantly looking for more opportunities and applying for more funding in the next few months to make sure this project becomes a reality. And I will need your support to identify some adequate funding for this project. We will be working with the community groups, grassroots, some of them we mentioned today in our presentation. And we want to make sure that artists get to meet these community groups and work together, collaborate together to come up with the art pieces. The street exhibit will be inaugurated. Again, this is the way we envision it. We want it to be inaugurated by a walking tour led by formerly undocumented migrants in our city, who will walk us through the art pieces and performance, share parts of their stories, and hopefully invite the audience to engage in this process and learn of learning and joining action that are happening in our city. So this is the project we wanted to present today. As you learned a little bit about our work, learned a little bit about the issue we're fighting for, and I'm gonna give the floor to Andy to talk a little bit about some of the art work that we have seen in our community and we yet to see as well.
Yeah, I'm just like looking at the time. So we might not have time to give examples, but just to like briefly add to Sinda's proposal, which is super exciting, and I'm really happy to like be working on this project with her, and I'm super excited to have other folks be involved in a meaningful way, not just like to create art and like display it and that's it, like just to really work with the community. And yeah, so like the slide says, like art that doesn't just amplify, it like reimagines things. One of the things when I was thinking about this particular project and how you know there is like the initial narrative of like giving voice to the voiceless or whatever, but folks really have their own voices. They're not completely voiceless. Um, and instead of, I mean, we could obviously highlight some of the hardships that folks have, but also maybe like reimagining the art in a way that's like, how do we sort of show like a future where there isn't like this hierarchical weird immigration system where people are othered in a particular way, where like we see folks who are undocumented as part of our community, and where those like when those barriers come up that they where they don't exist, and what that art looks like, whether yeah through like some of the examples that Sinda had mentioned. And yeah, I think it'll be really exciting to work with folks. And another like interesting fact that I was reading about recently, that this particular logo that's so infamous now was designed by John Hood, who is a Navajo artist that's kind of based like on the US side of the US Mexican border. He's a graphic designer that worked for transportation for like the US government, and had came up with design out of necessity, because the major highway that migrants were crossing uh, was very dangerous. And unfortunately, a lot of people had died trying to cross this highway, this really busy highway. And so he needed to design this sign to be able to have, drivers be like empathetic to people who are crossing this border. And I just found like what I was reading about was so interesting, in that the relationship between just like indigenous folks in their land and like folks trying to like flee their own land for the same fucking reasons. Sorry, I just swore in this presentation. I thought I was gonna not. Yeah, anyways, so just all this to say is that like there's particular kinds of art that derive from issues, and you know they do have like a particular impact, and like questioning why they are you know necessary is really important. I have two examples of art, but also it's 1:53, and I think it's good to maybe just have like questions for now, and if there isn't, then we can play them because they're like a minute each. And yeah, the examples that I was going to show are just like big installation pieces that speak to refugees and migrants without status. Yeah.
There aren't currently any questions in the chat on Facebook or on Zoom. I'd like to know a little bit more about how people can get involved, but if you'd like, perhaps we could show the examples you've prepared and get to that at the end. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, I'll show us the, oh.
Writing's not that easy.
All right. It didn't work.
Don't click on it.
Okay.
Here we go. The music is so misleading, but it is really good work.
Do you want me to show the other one before you speak to it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's a rare yet innovative show of unity at the US-Mexico border. Three neon pink seesaws poke through a large black metal fence connecting kids of all ages between Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, and El Paso, Texas. The idea was actually formed 10 years ago from two California professors, including architect Ronald Rael, who also teaches at the University of California. The thought was that even though people were separated, the seesaw would unite them.
Somos arquitectos.
We are architects, we are designers, that's all. But this is an act of activism because we gather people here to have fun, to talk, and to be happy. The National Guard looks on as kids teeter up and down. Ronald says the seesaw is a symbol for relations between the US and Mexico. If you do something on one side, it will have an impact on the other side. And that's what happens politically between the United States and Mexico. What they do there impacts here. What they do here, it will impact there. It's the same with the seesaw. Driving home the point that we are all connected. For InsideEdition.com, I'm Stephanie Officer.
Thank you so much, Stephanie Officer. So what I was speaking to before in like reimagining and humanizing people's particular struggles with immigration systems is important, because we don't want to enter into this like narrative of like world vision where it's just like this othering of folks. No, these are folks in the community. These are folks who just want to have like the same livelihoods, and just aren't given the chance for like very unfair reasons. And these, Sinda and I dream big about like what like this project could encompass, but like big installation pieces and works of art that kind of take over spaces of our everyday lives is what we want to do, because we want to sort of like take up the space and say that like, no, these are, you know, folks who live in this kind of precarity are many, and they live among us, and yeah, they're us. Like, it's so important to have people understand that, and have people think that there isn't, you know, this like one way of like existing, like and that there are reasons that people don't have that documents, and it's not necessarily their own fault. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Andy. And I mean, I look forward to some of your questions if we have maybe a couple of minutes. But also I look forward for connecting with anybody who's interested. I wanted to let you know that we would share through House of Paint today. So Knowledge Conference, we would like to share, we'll find a way to share some of the resources we shared in the presentation with you today. And we welcome everybody who is listening to us and part of this community to also share the work they are doing to improve migrants' rights and advocate for migrants' rights and for status for all the way we now understand it, hopefully. I'll leave it to that and see if we have any questions we can take. And thank you for listening to us.
Andi, Sinda, thank you so much for this presentation. And I'm really excited to see how this project takes shape and what comes together as you start to collaborate with artists. We have a question in the chat that just says, tell us more about the call. It's so exciting.
Yes, I can tell you a little more. So this project is becoming now a little bit my dream. I wrote it actually in the context of applying for a grant through university. And I applied last year. I came in third. So there's 2 prizes, and I came in third in the selection. I applied this year again. I did some tweaks to do some more jargon in academia, and hopefully I get it. I got selected from the 5 finalists, and I'm waiting to hear if I can get selected from the top 2. The project for me comes from, you know, like what we want to do is we want to work with artists who are here in Ottawa, who are interested in working with community members, with activists, with other organizations, with people who have been doing the work on the front line to conceptualize the pieces that we will put together. So the art installation, that would be an art piece that we would put somewhere in a public space. I'm really hoping it will be a grocery store. We know we'll work the permit stuff and all of that, but because the reason I was thinking of a grocery store is because I think a lot of migrants, first of all, work on the front line, and this pandemic showed how a lot of migrants had, you know, were essential services, essential service providers who continued working through the pandemic to assure that we get our food, we get it safely, and that we don't get exposed if we have the opportunity to work from home or to stay at home. So it's powerful in a sense to take that space that we go to it every day to buy our food and show the invisibility in a way, make visible what was invisible for the longest time. Our other art pieces, I want to see performance. I know hip hop has 4 elements to it, which is the graffiti, murals, the performance art, and obviously the DJ, the spoken word. And for the performance piece, I really look a lot to House of Paint and hip hop in many sense, because it's a very it's the art that advocate, it's the art of the struggle. And I don't see better ways of, you know, then turning to artists within hip hop to perhaps get in touch with us and say, hey, like I want to perform in this and I want to put on a show that will make people talk, that will start the conversation in our city. We also are looking for funding constantly. So we look to House of Paint to support us in this process to see if we can identify adequate funding. I'm not sure, Andy, do you want to add maybe something?
Yeah, I mean,
On
the only things that I wanted to add is that alongside Sinda, I've been trying to secure like art grants specifically around this project as well. Um, and yeah, like hip hop artists like bring in like the cool subversive art. So of course we would love to incorporate more hip hop artists around this project, just because it's just a different and like more fun and accessible form of art practice. And yeah, like I think for us, our first step is like securing the funding, obviously, to be able to. I mean, a lot of the funding will literally be going towards artists and folks with lived experiences in terms of like the walk that we were envisioning and organizing. So there's like that, and then once we've secured that, we'll have more of a formal call out that will have House of Paint share, as well as other organizations as well.
Another thing maybe I will add is around the walking tour. We would love, as I mentioned in the short proposal, was like it will be led by formally undocumented migrants, and reason being this is a storytelling time. I want to make sure that, and we want to make sure that we hear from the people affected, but also they get the agency they need to tell their stories, and the stories is not told on their behalf for them. And that is super important in this work, as we know that immigrants go through many, many instances where agency is stripped away from them as they have to navigate the different loops and hoops in the system. And so this is a project that put at the forefront the stories of migrants and undocumented migrants, by migrants and undocumented migrants.
This is great. It's so important to see these stories told in the first person by the people need to talk about their own experiences. And I look forward to chatting with you both about how we can collaborate and how House of Paint can support. If anyone else wants to get in touch with you to talk about collaboration or to get involved as an artist, what's the best way to reach you?
I will share my email right now in the chat. Old school, I think. Yeah, but email is good for me.
Folks can just message me on Instagram. It's cool. It's pretty informal. I think in the near future, ideally, we'd like to set up some kind of like website where folks can kind of learn about who we are and stuff, and what our goals are for this project, and get in contact through us there. But one thing at a time.
Wonderful. Well, Andi, Sinda, thank you so much for your time. Absolutely keep us in the loop, and House of Paint will continue to amplify your message and try to help you make connections wherever possible. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this presentation with us today, and we're looking forward to collaborating. Thank you to everyone who has spent the past hour with us. This is a wrap on day 3 of House of Paint's Knowledge Conference for 2021, but we will be back tomorrow with programming, including a panel on getting your music heard by radio DJs, moderated by Jay Morris, aka Your Favorite Light Skin. And then in the afternoon, we will have workshops with Alea De Castro and B-Boy Afternoon on women in street dance and going pro, learning professional skills and building your portfolio as a professional artist. Thank you again, Andi and Sinda. I'm really looking forward to how this project's going to come together. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.